Chapter 1. The Ghostly Drummer, from Tedworth, England, 1661, 1663. The Magistrates' Dilemma, when the legitimate government is faced with the impossible. The immaculate legal archives of Wiltshire County House, what is arguably the most thoroughly documented poltergeist case in the history of English legal proceedings. The supernatural manifestations were so systematic and persistent that they forced the respected magistrate to risk his reputation by keeping detailed written records of phenomena that challenged all aspects of his rationalistic worldview. John Mompesson, Justice of the Peace for Wiltshire, epitomized everything that was valued during the Restoration era: legal precision, Protestant rationality, and systematic skepticism of superstitious claims. His meticulous documentation of the Tedworth drummer case, preserved both in his personal correspondence and in official court records, provides, according to modern researchers, an unprecedented understanding of how educated minds of the 17th century handled prolonged encounters with unexplained phenomena. The case began in March 1661, when Judge Mompesson confiscated a drum from William Drury, a tramp accused of fraudulent extortion using forged discharge papers. Drury, who claimed to be a former Cromwell soldier, raised money all over Wiltshire by producing documents that Mompesson's investigation revealed to be fabricated. The confiscation seemed routine until Drury reportedly stated that Mompesson would not rest as long as he owned his drum. Modern court records kept in the National Archives show that Drury was subsequently tried and exiled to the American colonies for his fraudulent activities. However, Mompesson's detailed correspondence with colleagues, preserved in the British Library's manuscript collections, documents how supernatural disturbances began at his Tedworth estate within days of the drum's confiscation. The phenomena began with methodical drumming sounds coming from the roof and walls of Mompesson's house. His letters to other magistrates describe rhythmic patterns that closely mimicked army drum rolls: morning dawn, evening dawn, and marching sequences that any former soldier could recognize. What distinguished these sounds from the natural explanation was their systematic synchronization, their apparent intelligence in responding to actions in the house, and their continuation for almost 2 years, despite a thorough investigation. Mompesson's correspondence reveals attempts at rational explanation, which gradually collapsed under the weight of accumulated evidence. His initial assumption of a human factor, perhaps accomplices of the exiled Drury seeking revenge, crumbled when systematic surveillance of the property revealed no possible human source of concern. Reverend Joseph Glenville, a Fellow of the Royal Society and chaplain to King Charles II, conducted what is perhaps the earliest systematic paranormal investigation in English history. His published report, Sadducismus Triumphatus, 1681, documents a methodology that anticipates modern techniques of paranormal research: controlled periods of observation, verification by multiple witnesses, and attempts at systematic communication with the alleged entity. The Glenville investigation records demonstrate how phenomena have evolved beyond simple drum beats to include systematic responses to verbal questions. Witnesses reported that the entity could produce a certain number of beats upon request, could repeat rhythmic patterns beaten off by observers, and demonstrated visible awareness of household chores and conversations. Church records of Tedworth Parish preserved the testimony of many witnesses, including visiting clergy, local nobles, and domestic servants. These readings, recorded independently, demonstrate a remarkable consistency in the description of phenomena that included not only auditory manifestations, but also physical movement of furniture, unexplained lights, and temperature variations that did not obey seasonal patterns. The case attracted the attention of some of England's most respected intellectual figures of the Restoration era. Robert Boyle, founder of the Royal Society, corresponded with Mompesson about the phenomena. The letters, which are kept in the archives of the Royal Society, reveal Boyle's scientific curiosity, mixed with sincere concern about the consequences for natural philosophy if the messages turn out to be accurate. King Charles II himself sent investigators to investigate the Tedworth case. Royal correspondence held in a collection of government documents shows how court skeptics expected a quick exposure of what they assumed was a complex fraud or mass hysteria. Instead, the royal investigators returned with reports supporting Mompesson's testimony, but providing no conventional explanation for the documented phenomena. The systematic nature of the Tedworth riots defies conventional explanations through its apparent reasonableness and responsiveness. Modern analysis of Mompesson's recordings reveals phenomena that anticipated human behavior, responded appropriately to different types of questions, and demonstrated knowledge of household chores that no external agent could possess without supernatural insight. The resolution of the case remains as mysterious as its manifestation. Mompesson's last letters, dated 1663, describe a gradual attenuation of the phenomena rather than a sudden cessation. The drumbeats became less frequent, the answers to questions became more sporadic, and eventually silence reigned in the Tedworth estate. Although Mompesson noted that the complete silence did not return his house to the peaceful atmosphere he had enjoyed before. Modern historians studying the Tedworth records are confronted with evidence that resists conventional historical explanation, while remaining too well documented to dismiss it as a fabrication or mass hallucination. The case set a precedent for serious academic scrutiny of paranormal claims, demonstrating how encounters with the supernatural could force educated people to risk their reputations by keeping detailed accounts of impossible events. Chapter 2. The Inhabited Rectory in Borley, England, 1863-1944, The Most Haunted House, a church investigation into sustained supernatural activity. The archives of the Society for Psychical Research, housed in the library of the University of Cambridge, contain more than 80 years of systematic documentation of what became known as the most haunted house in England. The pastoral home in Borley, Essex, where successive Anglican clergy encountered phenomena so persistent and diverse that the Church of England itself was forced to authorize a formal investigation in an attempt to reconcile reports of the supernatural with theological doctrine. The Reverend Henry Dawson Ellis Bull, appointed rector of Borley in 1862, began documenting unusual occurrences at the newly built rectory within months of his arrival. His parish records, held in the Essex County Archives, contain marginal notes describing sounds, apparitions, and physical disturbances that continued throughout the 30 years of his ministry, creating what researchers consider to be the most extensive ecclesiastical documentation of sustained paranormal activity in the history of the Anglican Church. Bulla's first reports describe the systematic appearance of a nun-like figure on the grounds of the rectory, observed walking along the same path through the garden at approximately the same evening hours. Visitors to the parish, including fellow clergy and church officials, independently confirmed these observations with descriptions that demonstrated remarkable consistency, despite the fact that they had been recorded separately for decades. Church correspondence stored in the diocese's archives shows how Bula's superiors initially interpreted his reports as symptoms of psychological stress caused by isolation, a reasonable assumption given Borley's remote location and the demanding nature of rural ministry. However, when visiting bishops and archdeacons began to personally observe the phenomena during official inspections of the parish, church sentiment shifted from skeptical rejection to systematic documentation. Reverend Harry Feister, who succeeded Bull at Borley Rectory in 1930, kept detailed diaries that expanded the documented phenomena beyond visual appearances to include systematic physical disturbances, the movement of objects for no apparent reason, the appearance of written messages on walls, and systematic reactions to religious prayers and rituals, which implied reasonable interaction with church activities. Feister's diaries, kept in the archives of the Society for Psychical Research, document more than 2,000 individual paranormal incidents during his 5 years of residence in Borley. His systematic recording methodology, noting time, witnesses, weather conditions, and possible conventional explanations, provides what paranormal researchers consider to be an unprecedented look at long-term supernatural manifestations in religious settings. The systematic investigation of the Borley Rectory by Harry Price, founder of the National Laboratory for Psychical Research, has established methodological precedents for scientific paranormal research that influence modern investigative protocols. Price's documentation, held at the University of London Library, includes photographs, temperature readings, electromagnetic measurements, and witness statements collected under controlled conditions. Price's research team included academics, scientists, clergy, and skeptical observers who kept independent records of their experiences at Borley. The convergence of their testimony, despite differing theoretical orientations and methodological approaches, has created what researchers consider convincing evidence of sustained supernatural activity that transcends individual psychological interpretation. The phenomenon most thoroughly documented in Borley included systematic written messages appearing on the walls of the rectory for no apparent reason. These messages, photographed by several researchers and stored in archival collections, demonstrate linguistic characteristics and historical knowledge that the witnesses could not have possessed by conventional means. Modern handwriting analysis has failed to identify a single modern individual as the source of these communications. Church records document how Borley's supernatural reputation created administrative difficulties for the Anglican Diocese of Chelmsford. Successive rectors requested transfers due to phenomena interfering with their pastoral duties, and parishioners reported unwillingness to attend evening services or come to the rectory for pastoral consultations. The systematic nature of these difficulties has forced church authorities to acknowledge supernatural claims while maintaining theological positions that have difficulty accommodating such phenomena. The subsequent destruction of the Borley Rectory by fire in 1939 did not put an end to the documented supernatural activity. Post-fire investigations revealed continued phenomena in the ruins, including systematic temperature variations, electromagnetic interference, and visual manifestations that persisted despite the lack of physical structures where traditional explanations of ghosts would localize residual spiritual energy. Archaeological investigations of the Borley site conducted in the 1940s uncovered evidence that could explain sustained supernatural activity. The excavations revealed the foundations of a medieval monastery and evidence of violent historical events that could have created traumatic imprints according to various paranormal theories. Although such explanations remain speculative rather than scientifically proven, the extensive documentation accumulated on the Borley Rectory challenges traditional historical methodology by presenting sustained witness testimony from credible sources who risk professional reputations by keeping detailed records of impossible events. Chapter 3, The Versailles Time Gap. France, 1901. An academic encounter with a temporal anomaly. The archives of St. Hugh's College, Oxford, contain detailed testimony from two prominent scientists whose afternoon visit to the Palace of Versailles turned into what researchers consider to be the most thoroughly documented case of alleged time displacement in the scientific literature. An encounter so methodically recorded and systematically researched that it forced a serious academic examination of temporal phenomena that traditional physics considered impossible. Annie Moberly, principal of St. Hugh's College, and Eleanor Jordan, vice principal and daughter of a respected clergyman, represented the intellectual elite of Edwardian England. Their joint credentials in classical education, historical science, and institutional administration have provided what researchers consider ideal qualifications for the systematic observation and rational analysis of anomalous phenomena. On August 10, 1901, while exploring the grounds of Versailles during a holiday visit to France, Moberly and Jordan documented experiencing what they initially described as an oppressive atmosphere and gradual environmental changes that seemed incompatible with the modern palace grounds, which they systematically inspected throughout the afternoon. Their separate written reports, compiled immediately after the experience and stored in the college archives, describe meeting people in costumes from a bygone era, whose behavior and appearance seemed incompatible with the typical tourist activities of the reenactors. The figures they observed demonstrated a knowledge of the geography of the palace that surpassed modern tourist information and displayed social manners that seemed authentic to the 18th century rather than staged. Jordan's detailed notes described systematic architectural features that seemed incompatible with the documented restoration of 20th century Versailles. Bridges, buildings, and landscape elements that seemed to reflect the pre-revolutionary configuration of the palace rather than its modern appearance. Her architectural observations, compared with historical plans of the palace preserved in the French National Archives, demonstrate remarkable accuracy regarding features that were destroyed or significantly altered before 1901. The systematic investigation conducted by Moberly and Jordan after their experience set methodological precedents for academic paranormal research. They separately explored 18th century Versailles, consulted historical documents, studied portraits from that era, and interviewed French historians to verify the accuracy of their observations, creating what researchers considered to be the most thorough scientific study of claims of temporal anomalies in the academic literature. Their research revealed disturbing correlations between their experiences and specific historical events. The emotional atmosphere they described, the location of the figures they observed, and the estimated date indicated by environmental evidence corresponded exactly to October 5th, 1789, the day when revolutionary mobs forced Marie Antoinette to flee Versailles, ending the monarchy's stay in the palace forever. The French historical archives studied by Moberly and Jordan contained descriptions of the royal family's last day at Versailles, which coincided with the details observed by Oxford scientists. The specific individuals present, their location on the palace grounds, their emotional state, and their activities during the crisis that transformed French history. The correlation between their observations and documented historical events exceeded statistical probability, providing details that were not available in the standard travel literature. The publication of their story in 1911 attracted the attention of European academic institutions and organizations of mental research. Scientists from Cambridge, the Sorbonne, and German universities examined their methodology and evidence, trying to provide the usual explanations for the correlations between their experiences and historical documentation, which they could not have had access to before their visit to Versailles. Modern criticism of the Moberly-Jordan case has focused on potential common explanations. The mistaken identification of reenactment tourists, psychological suggestion reinforced by historical knowledge, or the unconscious embellishment of memories in order to conform with subsequent research discoveries. However, a systematic analysis of their testimony reveals details that predated their historical research and correlated with archival documents not available to the public in 1901. The interpretation of the lapse in time of their experience was supported by subsequent visitors to Versailles who reported similar phenomena. Independent testimony collected by French paranormal researchers describes environmental changes, figures in period costumes, and emotional atmospheres consistent with Moberly and Jordan's report, suggesting either a persistent temporal anomaly in the palace or systematic psychological effects that certain locations can trigger in susceptible individuals. A modern analysis of the Versailles case examines possible theoretical frameworks for temporal displacement. Quantum mechanical interpretations of time perception, psychological theories about the activation of location-specific memory, and parapsychological theories about traumatic historical events that create stable temporal imprints. However, none of these frameworks provides definitive explanations for the specific evidence documented by credible academic observers. Moberly and Jordan's academic credibility transforms their Versailles experience from a simple paranormal anecdote into a serious academic puzzle. Their systematic methodology, independent verification, and detailed documentation create what historians consider convincing evidence of temporal phenomena that challenge traditional understanding of time, memory, and historical reality. Chapter 4. The Drummer from Cortachy, Scotland, 1760-1900. The Highland Prophecy and Aristocratic Doom. When ancient curses target noble houses. Among the papers of the Earls of Airlie, in the archives of Cortachy Castle in Angus, Scotland, lie more than a century of testimony documenting supernatural phenomena that seem to systematically target the nobility. The ghostly drummer, whose appearances correlated so consistently with family tragedies that the Scottish aristocracy developed protocols for responding to supernatural warnings, challenging both rationalistic philosophy, so is Presbyterian theology. The documented story of supernatural drummer Cortacci begins with a clan war and a judicial execution that established what became known as the Airlie Curse. Historical records held in the National Archives of Scotland detail how a captured drummer from a feuding clan was executed at Cortacci Castle in the mid-18th century after reportedly declaring that his drumming would usher in doom for the Ogilvy family for successive generations. Reverend Patrick Grant, a Presbyterian minister and family chaplain to the Earls of Airlie, kept detailed records of supernatural encounters at Cortacci Castle from 1760 to 1820. His diaries, kept at the National Library of Scotland, document the systematic occurrence of drumming sounds that preceded significant deaths in the family with such consistency that domestic workers developed protocols for responding to supernatural warnings. Grant's documentation reveals how Presbyterian theology attempted to accommodate supernatural phenomena that seemed to operate with divine permission, while serving visible purposes of damnation that challenged Christian concepts of spiritual authority. His theological correspondence with ministers from Edinburgh demonstrates systematic attempts to reconcile the attested phenomena with Reformed doctrine, while acknowledging evidence beyond the usual religious interpretation. The case of Lady Dalhousie provides what researchers consider to be the most thoroughly documented aristocratic ghost encounter in Scottish history. During her visit to Cortacci Castle in 1844, she documented hearing systematic drumming emanating from the castle walls during the evening hours when no human drummer could be present. Her detailed letters, kept in the Dalhousie family archives, describe phenomena that she initially attributed to the pranks of servants until an investigation revealed no possible natural explanation. Lady Dalhousie's testimony is becoming historically significant due to her social standing and character. As the daughter of the Duke of Buccleuch and a prominent member of the Scottish aristocracy, her reputation for being practical, sensible, and systematically skeptical of supernatural claims provided the credibility that transformed drummer Cortacci from local folklore into a documented aristocratic encounter with unexplained phenomena. The systematic investigation conducted by Lady Dalhousie during her visit established a methodology that anticipated modern paranormal research. She coordinated with castle staff to track all possible natural sources of drum sounds, kept detailed time records of supernatural phenomena, and interviewed household members separately to verify the sequence of reported experiences. Her investigation revealed drumbeat patterns that demonstrated apparent intelligence and systematic synchronization. The phenomena occurred mainly in the evening hours, followed certain rhythmic patterns that the witnesses recognized as traditional Highland military drumming, and consistently preceded significant family events, especially deaths, with periods ranging from several days to weeks. The predictive aspect of the Cortacci drumbeat created what historians consider to be a unique documentation of supernatural phenomena that seemed to operate according to systematic temporal patterns rather than random occurrence. Family correspondence stored in the Graf archives demonstrates how successive generations have developed informal protocols for responding to supernatural warnings, trying to reconcile precognitive phenomena with a traditional understanding of causality. The Victorian documentation of the Cortacci drummer reveals systematic attempts by educated observers to provide natural explanations for phenomena that have consistently resisted rational interpretation. Guest testimony stored in castle records includes reports from military officers, clergymen, physicians, and scientists who heard the drumbeat, defied acoustic explanation, demonstrating characteristics suggesting intelligent rather than mechanical origin. The case of Miss Margaret Dalrymple, documented in 1876, provides detailed testimony about systematic communication with a supernatural drummer. Her letters describe how the entity responded to verbal questions through variations in drumbeat patterns, demonstrated knowledge of family history that visitors could not possess, and provided warnings about future events that later proved accurate. Modern analysis of Cortacci's documentation reveals prophetic accuracy exceeding statistical probability, while remaining specific enough to verify through historical records. The systematic correlation between supernatural warnings and subsequent family tragedies creates what researchers consider compelling evidence of precognitive phenomena that challenge the traditional understanding of temporal causation. The psychological impact of sustained supernatural activity on aristocratic households provides insight into how educated Victorian families handled encounters with phenomena that contradicted their rationalistic worldview. Family correspondence revealed systematic adaptation strategies. Some family members developed protective rituals, others sought a scientific explanation, and others accepted supernatural warnings as potentially useful guidance. The gradual decline of supernatural activity in Cortacci in the early 20th century parallels broader cultural changes that may have affected the relationship between traditional Scottish supernatural beliefs and modernizing social structures. The last documented appearances of the drummer occurred during the First World War, when traditional aristocratic power faced systematic challenges that transformed Scottish social hierarchies. Chapter 5. The Enfield Poltergeist. England, 1907-1979. Modern documentation meets ancient phenomena. The archives of the Society for Psychical Research and the records of the Metropolitan Police stored in the National Archives contain 2 years of systematic documentation of the phenomena that forced rational institutions, law enforcement agencies, social services, academic researchers, and the news media to face supernatural claims that challenged every aspect of materialism at the end of the 20th century, taking place under unprecedented scrutiny. The case began in August 1977 at 284 Green Street, Enfield, North London, when Peggy Hodgson, a divorced mother of 4, contacted the Enfield police to report a systematic disturbance at her council house that defied natural explanation. PC Caroline Heaps responded to what she expected to be a routine domestic dispute, instead documented the phenomena that forced the official recognition of supernatural activity in the Metropolitan Police incident reports. The official report of PC Heaps, kept in police archives, describes the systematic movement of furniture for no apparent reason, observed in controlled conditions in the presence of several witnesses. Her testimony gained legal significance due to her professional training in surveillance, her systematic approach to collecting evidence, and her initial skepticism of supernatural claims, which made her subsequent admission of unexplained phenomena particularly compelling. A systematic investigation conducted by Maurice Gross of the Society for Psychical Research has established methodological precedents for modern paranormal documentation. Gross's research, conducted over a period of 2 years with systematic recording equipment, multiple witnesses, and controlled surveillance conditions has created what researchers consider to be the most thoroughly documented poltergeist case in modern paranormal literature. Guy Lyon Playfair, an experienced paranormal researcher and author, provided systematic documentation of phenomena at Enfield that demonstrated apparent intelligence, responsiveness to human interaction, and systematic patterns suggesting organized supernatural activity rather than random disorder. His detailed records, stored in the archives of the OPI, document more than 1,500 individual paranormal incidents during the investigation period. The complexity of the case emerges from the systematic documentation of multiple types of phenomena, systematic movement of furniture and objects, unexplained sounds and voices, temperature variations, defied explanations of heating systems, and systematic communication through supernatural agents that intelligently responded to researchers' questions and actions in the home. The advent of visible communication through supernatural agents has created what researchers consider to be unprecedented documentation of systematic interaction between modern researchers and alleged spiritual entities. Audio recordings stored in the archives of the OPI document voices claiming to represent deceased individuals who provided historical information that witnesses could not have known by ordinary means. Systematic verification of historical statements made through supernatural communication revealed accuracy beyond probability, demonstrating knowledge of local history, deceased residents, and community events that young household members could not access through regular research. This correlation between supernatural claims and verifiable historical information has provided what researchers consider compelling evidence of genuine spiritual communication. Media documentation of the Enfield phenomena has created systematic visual evidence supporting witness testimony, raising questions about potential conventional explanations. Photographs and audio recordings studied by technical experts and stored in news archives show systematic patterns that resist natural explanation while maintaining consistency with witness descriptions. The involvement of Enfield Social Services in the case reveals how the institutional authorities handled supernatural allegations involving child welfare issues. Social workers documented the phenomena personally, trying to develop appropriate responses to supernatural activity that seemed to center around teenage household members, especially 11-year-old Janet Hodgson. A psychological assessment of household members conducted by qualified professionals and stored in files revealed no evidence of mental illness, intentional fraud, or psychological conditions that could explain persistent supernatural phenomena. A systematic psychological assessment has provided what researchers consider important evidence against conventional explanations, attributing poltergeist activity to unconscious psychological projection. The educational value of the case emerges from systematic documentation by multiple independent observers using modern recording technology in an environment that minimizes the possibility of fraud or misinterpretation. The convergence of testimony from police, researchers, social workers, journalists, and neighbors has created what paranormal researchers consider unprecedented evidence of sustained supernatural activity. A critical analysis of Enfield's documentation recognizes potential conventional explanations, while examining evidence that has consistently resisted natural interpretation. Skeptical researchers identified possible fraud in some of the incidents, while acknowledging other phenomena that exceeded household members' ability to reproduce with conventional means, creating systematic documentation that continues to challenge traditional understanding of physical reality. The systematic nature of the phenomena at Enfield, their apparent reasonableness, their responsiveness to investigation, their systematic patterns and their duration, transform the case from a simple paranormal anecdote into a serious challenge to the materialistic philosophy that dominated academic thought at the end of the 20th century, while providing detailed evidence that continues to influence modern methodology of paranormal research. Chapter 6, The Lady in Brown, from Rainham Hall, England, 1835-1936. The world's most famous photographic ghost. When professional photography captured the impossible, the archives of Country Life magazine and the photo collection stored at the National Portrait Gallery contain what historians consider to be the most thoroughly authenticated photographic ghost in existence. An image so technically sophisticated and professionally documented that it has defied photographic experts for almost a century, providing visual evidence that seems to go beyond the usual explanation. The Lady in Brown from Rainham Hall became one of the most famous ghosts in the United Kingdom. When photographers from Country Life magazine claim to have captured his image in what is probably the world's most famous ghost photograph, taken in 1936. The systematic documentation surrounding the creation of this photograph provides what researchers consider to be an unprecedented look at professional ghost photography under controlled conditions, eliminating most of the usual explanations for fraudulent ghost images. On September 19, 1936, 2 photographers from Country Life magazine were sent to Rainham Hall to capture its famous and unique architecture. Captain Hubert S. Provand and his assistant Indra Shira were conducting routine architectural photography for a magazine series about English country houses when they encountered phenomena that turned their professional assignment into paranormal documentation that continues to challenge photographic experts across multiple disciplines. The historical context of Rainham Hall provides a systematic documentation of supernatural activity that predates the famous photograph by more than a century. The Townsend family, who owned an estate in Norfolk since the 17th century, kept detailed records of supernatural encounters that consistently included the apparition of a woman in a brown brocade dress, creating what researchers consider to be a remarkable sequence in witness accounts across multiple generations. According to tradition, apparition represents Lady Dorothy Walpole, the 18th century mistress of the manor, whose documented historical presence in Rainham provides a potential explanation for the continued spiritual attachment to the estate. Historical records held in the Norfolk County Archives detail Dorothy Walpole's residence in Rainham in the 1720s as Charles Townsend's second wife, creating a documented historical basis for the supernatural manifestation. Systematic witness statements collected by the Townsend family demonstrate consistent characteristics of encounters with the Lady in Brown that predate the 1936 Decades photo. Family correspondence stored in the estate's archives describes apparitions' observations, which consistently include the same location on the stairs, the same brown dress, and the same transparent appearance that the Country Life photographers later captured using professional equipment. The technical analysis of the 1936 photograph reveals a sophisticated understanding of the photographic processes of the early 20th century, which enhances its credibility as authentic supernatural documentation. The image was created using professional plate cameras with controlled exposure settings, documented lighting conditions, and systematic photographic protocols that eliminate most of the usual explanations for double exposure or fraudulent manipulation. Professional photographic experts who studied the image of country life consistently recognized its technical sophistication while trying to provide the usual explanations for the transparent figure appearing on the stairs. A systematic analysis conducted by photographic laboratories reveals no evidence of deliberate manipulation, double exposure, or technical fraud that could explain the supernatural imagery captured in professional settings. Since its appearance in 1936, the ghostly image of a lady in brown descending the stairs of a country house in Norfolk has been widely replicated as irrefutable evidence of the existence of ghosts. The publication of the photograph in Country Life magazine created international attention, which attracted a systematic investigation by paranormal researchers, skeptical scientists, and photographic experts who examined both the technical aspects and the historical context surrounding its creation. Contemporary witness statements provided by Captain Provand and Indra Shira demonstrate how professional photographers handled encounters with phenomena that challenged their technical expertise, occurring under controlled conditions that excluded most conventional explanations. Their detailed reports, stored in the archives of Country Life, describe systematic approaches to documenting supernatural phenomena while maintaining professional photographic standards. A systematic investigation conducted by the Society for Psychical Research following the publication of the photograph provides a methodological framework for analyzing professional ghost photography, examining statements that seem to go beyond the usual technical explanation. The OPI researchers interviewed both photographers separately, examined the original photographic plates, and conducted a systematic analysis of the Raynham Hall environment to verify the conditions described in the witness statements.